You know why you're here. It's playoff fantasy football. And if you are in the playoffs, you need to give yourself a round of applause. And now we need to go win the championship. And if you are not in the playoffs, let's just play spoiler right now. Starting out with tier 1, Jamar Chase at number 1 and Jackson Smith-Njigba at number 2. If it has not become clear from the first time I did these rankings when Jamar Chase was playing against the Baltimore Ravens, Jamar Chase will be at number 1 because of the Ravens matchup. His history against the Ravens is too rich. This needs to be everyone's number 1 ranking this week because he can give you 50, and I'm not joking when I say that, against the Baltimore Ravens because he's done it a couple of times in his career. Jackson Smith-Njigba, though, obviously belongs in the same tier. Taking on the Colts, not that matchup particularly matters, but I do think this actually is a good opportunity for him because they have a lot of injuries in that secondary. Now, dropping down to that next tier, Puka Nacua is at number 3, and Rashee Rice is at 4. Now, Puka Nacua, I dropped below Davante Adams last week, and I said, it just feels like Davante's such a lock to get in the end zone, and it's such a struggle for Puka to get there, and then Puka goes off for 2 touchdowns, and Davante has 0. So, obviously, I think what I'll get at is saying this. Puka is such a steady volume guy that his floor is higher than Davante's. But I would say that Davante hits that ceiling more often, so he still belongs in the same tier as Puka. And in this matchup, I think they could both go off against the Detroit defense, who is particularly weaker in the secondary right now. Rashee Rice at number 4. I think this matchup is much better. And I said this last week. Rashee Rice was not going to have a good day. That was always going to happen because if you look at the matchup against Derek Stingley and just the rest of that Houston defense getting after Mahomes, it was never going to work. Now, I will say this. The Chargers with Jesse Minter as coordinator are a very formidable group. So it's not the easiest matchup, but it's definitely much easier than last week. And I think Rashee Rice gets back to doing really well in fantasy this week. Davante Adams at 5 and CeeDee Lamb at 6. So with Davante, like I just said, I do think he still belongs in the same tier as Puka because I do think you can kind of almost count on a touchdown basically every single week. And I think particularly in this matchup, it does feel like one of those shootout type of games to where they're going to have to score and just win by like a couple points when you score 40 points. And I do think Davante does belong in this tier because this offense has done so well, and he has been a basically virtual touchdown lock the entire year. So even though he's below Puka this week, it won't be by much, obviously. CeeDee Lamb at 6. Obviously, we don't know the status yet, but the good news is that he did get the concussion last Thursday night, so he's going to get 10 total days of rest time in between then. So CeeDee Lamb, last we've heard, is that he's progressing nicely through the protocol, whatever that's supposed to mean. The only concern I have here, obviously, is because they don't really want, the NFL does not want you to play through concussions. Like T. Higgins just went through the same thing. He's probably not going to play again this year because of that second concussion he just had. So I could see them sitting him out. And also, if they do play him, I will acknowledge this. The Minnesota defense, they've been shutting down number 1s lately. So I do worry about that from that perspective if CD does play. But then Pickens at number 7. If CD doesn't play, I kind of worry about Pickens actually more than I would worry about him with CD because what we learned from Pickens last week, the guy is still a head case, and that was always my problem with George Pickens. Now, obviously, I was way wrong saying not to draft George Pickens before the season. He's done fantastic because he is a fantastic player. But I will also say this. Pickens in this matchup, if there's no CD, I don't love it. But if there is CD, I do love it for sure because he's done really well with CD as that number 2. Nico Collins at number 8. Listen, versus Arizona, this matchup feels so great to me that I don't see how it's not going to work. Right? Like Nico Collins is obviously the number 1 in Houston. He's done so well from a efficiency standpoint. He actually doesn't get targeted into oblivion very often. But what he does get, he does really well with it. So to me, I'd rather have him than Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is, yes, coming off a 10-day rest from that ankle injury, but I still do not think that he was fully healthy. He looked really good. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from him. The guy is a tough SOB. But against the Rams, I don't love the matchup, first of all. And second of all, I just think that maybe there could be more of a focus on Jameson Williams this week, because ever since Campbell started taking the play calling, he has been consistently involved. So I just kind of worry about a couple things with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'd rather have Nico over him, but I want to put it to the test on our site, FS Roundup. We'll start a poll on this one. So I'm going to look up Nico Collins, and then I'm going to go to chat, and then I'm going to go to start a poll for week 15, and I'm going to add Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I want you to go vote on this one right here. Completely free to vote, completely free to start your own poll. And if you want access to my top 300 rankings this week, if you want access to the comparison feature, the league sync up feature, and the automatic waiver tool, you could do that with a premium subscription at fsroundup.com. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Ted McMillan is at number 10, and Ladd McConkey lands at 11. Now, he'll be an interesting one to discuss. Ted McMillan, coming off the bye week against New Orleans, doesn't feel like this one will fail. Now, I do think that there's a lot of merit to the argument. The Saints defense actually is better than you'd think, but at the same time, Ted McMillan has actually become kind of a touchdown threat, because I think they're starting to figure out how to use him best. And he's obviously by far the number one at this point, that it feels kind of like Ted has a really decent shot to hit a 20-point ceiling on any given week. Now, I don't think that he has like a 30-point ceiling or anything like that, and I do think that his floor is still relatively high. So I do think that he's kind of got this like 10 to 22-point window, which is perfect for a number 10 ranking against the Saints. Ladd McConkey at 11, and he's going to Kansas City to take on Trent McDuffie. So we'll see how this one goes. Obviously, last week he was locked down by Cooper DeJean. He did excellent on Ladd. But does that mean that Ladd is all of a sudden not important? Obviously not. If you paid attention to that game, Ladd McConkey was still very important. He was oftentimes the first read. He just wasn't open. And I don't think that'll be like that for a second straight week. I do expect Ladd to have a good game and a bounce-back game in this one, and he clearly is, just to me and to anyone who watches the Chargers, the number one wide receiver by a mile. Jameson Williams at 12 and Jalen Waddle back at 13. So Jameson Williams, like I said with Amon-Ra, if you have looked at the history, and not like it's been a long time, but ever since Dan Campbell started taking over the play calling, Jameson Williams has been consistently involved every single week. The only reason he had one goose egg with Dan Campbell was because two big plays of his got called back. So I don't look at this and say to myself, J-Mo's got this really low floor anymore. J-Mo does not. Like, he's been involved every single week. I don't love the matchup, once again. But I do think that there's enough of an injury there for Amon-Ra St. Brown for J-Mo to potentially be a better fantasy play for a second straight week than Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, I'm not going to predict it because Amon-Ra is more of a target guy, but J-Mo obviously could take off at any point for a big play, and that's kind of what they need from him in this type of game. Jalen Waddle at 13. Listen, I was wrong last week for really the first time all year on the Dolphins. They went into cold weather and they dominated the Jets. Now, it is the Jets, obviously, so it's not like we're talking about they went into Arrowhead to beat the Chiefs or anything like that. They did fine against the Jets. But the point is that, listen, maybe the cold weather is not affecting them right now. I still do think it is. But the Steelers defense, I mean, they just give up play after play after play to anybody's number one receiver. So I do feel like this is a good game for Jalen Waddle to have another good week in fantasy football. And I just kind of feel like when you look at his target share, when you look at the floor, you kind of even those things out. When you actually look at the ceiling, it's really high still. So he belongs in this tier. A.J. Brown at 14 to round out the tier. Versus the Raiders, matchup couldn't be better. You just obviously never know when it comes to these guys. Now, I will say, I'm comfortable enough to rank him on his own without Devonta Smith right behind him in the same tier at this point, because A.J. Brown has been a central focal point of this offense. Like, the passing game is starting to revolve around A.J. Brown, and obviously the matchup is fantastic. Now, Jalen Hurts is obviously in a massive slump right now, so we'll see how that ends up working out, and that's why I can't rank A.J. much higher, because on any given week, they could go away from A.J. Brown, or Jalen Hurts can just suck. So I got to mitigate the risk a little bit. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we've got Zay Flowers at 15 and Devonta Smith lands at 16. Zay Flowers going to Cincinnati. The matchup is excellent, obviously. And he had to rise up my rankings because what he did against the Steelers was what I was expecting we'd see from Zay all year long. Now, I don't know if they're going to consistently do that. It doesn't feel like they have any consistency in that offense. But in this matchup, you just kind of got to take the shot. Right, it's against Cincinnati. This matchup is fantastic. I do ultimately see him getting several targets in this game. Whether or not they work out down the field, that remains to be seen. It didn't work out the first time, but I'll kind of vote against it happening again because of what he just did against Pittsburgh. Maybe he catches a little bit momentum. And like I said, ultimately, I'm just willing to roll the dice on this matchup for having him as a top 15 play at the wide receiver position this week. Devonta Smith at 16 versus the Raiders. Again, matchup is fantastic. And Devonta Smith, realistically, even with A.J. Brown getting targeted into oblivion, has not become an afterthought in the offense. He's really been involved on a weekly basis, and he, as well as AJ, can hit a big play on any given week. Now, the problem with him is that he's not exactly like a super dominant possession receiver. So either he's going to have a big week or it's going to be pretty minuscule. So you do have to, again, mitigate risk. And I would put him below AJ at this point because the targets have been going towards AJ. Jacoby Myers at 17 to round out this little tier right here. And he's going back home to play the Jets. Now, Jacoby Myers, in my opinion, is the clear number one wide receiver in Jacksonville. I think him and Trevor Lawrence just have more chemistry than Brian Thomas Jr. and Trevor Lawrence have. And to be clear, BTJ is actually going to be featured in these rankings again for the first time in several weeks. I do think of Jacoby Myers, though, as just a better option because he's being targeted at the red zone. He's their possession receiver who's always going to get third down opportunities. He'll get second down opportunities. He's not only just like a big play threat guy. He is all over the place for this team. So in my opinion, he's taking the role as number one, and it's against a great matchup. Dropping down to our next tier, DK Metcalf is at 18, and Chris Olave drops to 19. DK Metcalf, much like Zay Flowers, the ability has always been there. I will say this, DK and Zay, and I've always said, are the hardest players to rank at the wide receiver position for me on a weekly basis, and it's partly because they're so talented, and I know they can do well, and it doesn't really matter what matchup is. Like, they're really good players. It's just because of scheme, because of lack of effort sometimes from DK, because the guy can't catch. That's the reason I can't ever have these guys very consistently ranked, and I'm never right about them. The one thing I will say is the matchup's great, and if DK Metcalf could get past this stomach thing he's been dealing with, then he should be in line for another good game. Aaron Rodgers said it last week. He had such a good week in practice leading into the Ravens week that he wanted to make it a massive central piece of focus to target him into oblivion. And that's what I want to see it again from DK. But can you rely on it? Absolutely not. Chris Olave at 19. Listen, man, the matchup is not terrible. Actually, it's not the best, though. Like, J.C. Horn has actually become one of those corners you kind of have to watch out for. And they're coming off a bye week. So this one, I don't love this matchup, actually. And Olave, to me, looks pretty hurt. Like, he does look injured. Devon Vele has become, like, just as important in this offense. And I'm not saying that he's the wide receiver one now. I do think it's still Olave. But in this matchup against the Carolina Panthers with J.C. Horn, if they choose to put Horn on Olave for 95% of the game, I don't think it's Olave's best that we're going to see. So I've got to mitigate the risk a little bit while not moving him down too low because I do still think that any given week he can pop off for like 10 to 12 targets. Chris Godwin at 20 and Emeka Egbuka is below him. This is a revelation here. First time in I don't remember how long. Actually, probably the first time this year that I have ranked Godwin over Emeka Egbuka, and I think it's worthy. Because, listen, Godwin is getting the targets again. Like, and it's not that he's out-targeting Egbuka. He's actually not. But he's been more efficient with his work. He's not dropping as many passes, and he actually did drop a ball last week that would have been a big play. But Godwin, man, I just think that when you look at this offense, something is clearly wrong. And they play tomorrow night versus the Falcons. In theory, that matchup should be really good. But at the same time, man, I mean, you cannot trust either of these two guys. While I would want to put them much higher, Baker Mayfield is not healthy, and this wide receiver core is just off. Like, the timing and the rhythm of this offense, it just doesn't look great. So with Emeka Egbuka, once again, this guy is not last in the target share. This guy is still getting basically 8 to 10 targets on a per-game basis. Now, Mike Evans may be coming back this week, so I don't know. Everything is a mess, honestly. Tampa Bay, their wide receiver core is a total mess, and I honestly don't have confidence in either of them, while also acknowledging one of these two guys I would bet could be good for a 20-point game in this one. Terry McLaurin at 22 to round out the tier. I would say it was a little overzealous to rank Terry McLaurin as a top 10 receiver against the Vikings defense. That did not work out. Jaden Daniels injured again. Who knows if he's going to start this week? And honestly, the way Jaden has played this year, it's been a lost year. So even if it's Marcus Mariota, I still don't really have a problem putting Terry around this range because the matchup is really good against the Giants. That secondary can be beaten over the top. So I do think it's a better week for Terry McLaurin, but man, this Washington team is a total mess. Jaden Daniels is a total mess this year. And at this point, I have to mitigate risk with these Washington players from all fantasy football perspective because they just haven't done well enough this year on a consistent basis. Dropping down to our next tier, Wan'Dale Robinson's at 23 and Jaden Reed is at 24. So Wan'Dale Robinson in that same matchup versus the Washington Commanders can come out of the bye week and do well. Like Wan'Dale, I always feel like I'm underranking him because of target share, but if you look at him, obviously not every week is he going to get a big play. In fact, he had a massive game with Jameis Winston. Now with Jackson Dart back, feels like he's more the possession receiver when Darius Slayton and even Isaiah Hodgins are out there. So I do kind of feel like maybe 10 targets is kind of a little bit of a mirage if you actually look at it deeper because he might catch 7 of those for 40 yards. So you do have to kind of factor that into the ranking while also acknowledging with Dart at quarterback and against the Commanders defense, he belongs in the top 25. Jaden Reed is actually one spot over Christian Watson this week. Now, a lot of you may look at me sideways on this one, and I don't blame you. I've actually played a lot of Christian Watson in my own personal fantasy leagues. I like him. He's done very well, and I think he's opened up this offense. But my point on this week is this. They're playing Denver. That is all that needs to be said. That defense is dominant, and guess what? Pat Surtain is a traditional outside wide receiver lockdown corner. Who plays more on outside? Christian Watson. So my belief is that Pat Surtain spends a good amount of this game on Christian Watson because they don't want him to get over the top. So I do think that this is the week I would play Jaden Reed over Watson if I had both because Jaden Reed is more of a slot guy. And if you line him up against Moss, their second corner, or even their slot corner, I think he has a better ceiling this week than Watson does. I think Watson's going to be hard-pressed this week to get a big play. And we all know this, against a lockdown corner like Surtain is, it's harder to get the little stuff too. So if he goes on an 8-yard curl or a 12-yard slant, those will be locked up by Pat Surtain too. So he's got to hit a big play, or I don't think this matchup really works for him. I've got to keep him in the top 25 because he's done really well, and the offense looks really good. But at the same time, this feels like a Jaden Reed week to me over Watson. Dropping down to our last tier, Jawan Jennings is at 26, and Justin Jefferson lands at 27. How the mighty fall, man. Jawan Jennings, though, I will say this. I think that he's clearly the number one in San Fran at this point. I've been wrong for weeks on Ricky Pearsall. That has not worked out in my favor, and the matchup's really good. The only thing I still don't love about Jennings is I don't think his ceiling is that high. Like, Kittle is obviously the main weapon in this offense aside from McCaffrey. So it's either the targets are going to go mostly to McCaffrey or they're going to go to Kittle down the field. And then Jennings is kind of getting these possession receiver type of routes, which is fine because they always usually amount to either a red zone target or somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 yards down the field. So against Tennessee, I do think it's a good matchup, but at the same time, I just can't find myself to rank him much higher because I don't think he has an enormous ceiling. Justin Jefferson, I mean, he's clinging by a thread to being in the top 30. I mean, they had their best week as an offense this past week, and he was a non-factor. Like, think of that for a second. This offense scored 34 points against the Commanders, and Justin Jefferson was a non-factor. That tells me that his chemistry with J.J. McCarthy is non-existent. And he's a professional. He keeps saying the right things at the podium. I give him a lot of credit because I would be extremely frustrated if I was in his position. But man, against Dallas, you want to take advantage of the matchup. But what comfort and what positivity and what world would you feel comfortable playing Justin Jefferson? I've seen a lot of people say they're going to play him. No harm, no foul. More power to you. But me, I am not comfortable playing him, and he's hanging by a thread in these top 30 rankings. Michael Pittman Jr. is at 28. What a fun conversation this is. My gosh. Phillip Rivers, who has not played since 2020, is a grandfather now, is coming to be the quarterback in Indianapolis. Now, you might say to me, well, Ryan, he just got signed to the practice squad, and they're saying he may play this week, but it's not obvious. Listen, Phillip Rivers did not come out of retirement to be on the practice squad of the Colts. He's going to be their starter. Now, this week, even if it's Rivers, at Seattle, this matchup is brutal. And who knows what to expect from Rivers. If Rivers looks anything, like even 50% of what he used to look like, Pittman could actually be a solid fantasy play. But this week, I have no trust in this one. The only reason he's here is because I think if it's Rivers, he will get plenty of dump-offs. That's like, and when I say dump-offs, I'm talking like 2 to 3 yards down the field. That's what I could see for Pittman. So the ceiling in this one is not high. Brian Thomas Jr. is at 29. Congratulations for being back. And Cortland Sutton's at 30 to round us out. Brian Thomas Jr., listen, I think that you might be recognizing a name missing from here. If Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play, why is Michael Wilson not in the top 30, you might ask? And trust me, when I was doing these rankings, I was like, how is Wilson not in my top 30? But then you're like, oh yeah, he plays against the Texans who just shut down Rashee Rice. So yeah, it's going to stay like that, unfortunately, because I would say Brian Thomas Jr., I'd have more confidence playing because of the matchup versus the Jets, and he did look good last week and the previous week on what he was getting. So it's working more down the field. He's looking better. I do think that it's a matchup I would just much rather take advantage of. And not that Sutton's matchup is good at 30 versus Green Bay, but to me, when you look at Denver and you say to yourself, Troy Franklin is really losing steam in this offense. Like, he's on the field less. He's not getting targeted as much. Sutton appears to be their wide receiver one again. So I don't know how this one's going to go. I do think he's the best bet, and I do think at some point they can get one over the top maybe, or just have some good plays methodically down the field, which is typically Denver's MO. But I do think that ultimately Sutton at 30 could be a stretch. So you want to play Michael Wilson, have at it. But for me, I'd rather take advantage of Sutton when Michael Wilson's matchup is Houston. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 12 kicker rankings for the week, click on this video right here.